So I'll resume this morning where we left off last night. So there's the Buddha, remember, sitting there, practicing mindfulness of what's in front of him. And a number of bhikshus then came up to where the Bhagavan was sitting. After touching their heads to his feet, they walked around him to the right 3 times and sat down to one side. That's the very end of chapter 1. The Bhagavan the Buddha has lots of names, lots of epithets, and Bhagavan is one of them. It means something like one who brings prosperity. So anyway, these bhikshus touched their heads to his feet and walked around him 3 times in a respectful gesture of greeting, a ritual of greeting. And we don't do this now, but we also have ritualistic ways of relating to one another in the Dharma. In the Buddha's day, there was a sense of form, of ritual. And the idea was that the form and the ritual could contain and shape human interactions in such a way that they would maximize the possibility of Dharma arising and minimize the possibility of confusion, desire, aggression arising. That the forms would create a container like that. And actually, we have the same thing, although our forms are different. And from our cultural perspective, this ritual of respect would seem odd to us, that you would come up to me and touch your head to my foot and walk around me 3 times would seem a bit much. But in the Buddha's time, by those standards, it probably wasn't that big a deal. You know what I mean? It was probably culturally not as extreme as it would seem to us. And there are plenty of people who come and see our cultural forms in Zen and think it's extreme from their point of view. And there would be somebody who would observe 2 Western people meeting one another with a handshake and find that a very bizarre and strange cultural form that would be very off-putting. So, there are many, and of course, the ones that you're used to, you don't even notice, you don't even think of them as cultural forms. They disappear, they actually disappear. So, in a way, the fact that we're stretching a little bit to participate in Zen cultural forms to create a possibility of Dharma interaction, it's good for us that we're not used to it and that we stretch into it a little bit. So anyway, that was their way of doing things. Teaching arises in response to conditions. In a way, there's no need for any teaching, and there wouldn't be any teaching at all, because everything already is teaching. You don't need to make a fuss and add anything. And the only reason that there would be any teaching at all in the sense that we understand it is when a question arises. In other words, something arises that wants a response, and so teaching comes out of that interaction. So that is the teaching and the teacher. It isn't a person and a particular doctrine. It's the interaction, response, passionate need to know and understand, reaching out, responding. It's the total situation, all the conditions of interaction and inquiry and response. So there couldn't be a DiamondSutra unless somebody wants to know. The sutra wouldn't exist at all unless someone asks a question. And so in this case, it's Subhuti. And the sutra says Subhuti rises from his seat, uncovers his one shoulder, because I guess in those days, informally hanging around the camp, people wore their cases over two shoulders, typically. And you know, in India originally, the shoulder was literally bare. We wear something over our shoulder because we inherit Dharma from China, where it was colder, so they made a robe to wear over their shoulder so they wouldn't freeze. In India, you could have a bare shoulder, and it was okay. But they would wear their robes over both shoulders, except to show a sign of respect. You'd take the robe off the shoulder and bare the shoulder toward a person that you were venerating, and this was considered culturally a sign of respect and veneration. Ideally, and it does work out that way in this space, ideally, when I walk around the room in the morning, greeting everyone, I would bare my shoulder to you, which I do in this zendo, even though my shoulder's not bare because I got this robe on. I'm not wearing the kesa on this shoulder. If I'm circumambulating the Buddha, I should circumambulate the Buddha with this right shoulder. So in the morning when I greet you, I venerate you by walking in that way. Sometimes we're practicing in all kinds of different spaces, and so we can't always do that sometimes. But ideally, we would do it that way. And so that's what Subhuti does here. He takes the okesa off of his one shoulder, bares his shoulder in respect toward the Buddha. He kneels on one knee. He puts his palms together, and he bows. And that was the form in the early Sangha. I think quite literally that was the form for asking a question and invoking a teaching. So now we have introduced a new character, Subhuti, into the sutra. And Subhuti is often the speaker in the Prajnaparamita sutras, because Subhuti is known to be a specialist in Prajnaparamita teachings. And the name Subhuti means, like a lot of these names and etymologies, you get a little bit of a variation. It might mean this and it might mean that, and the two things could be quite opposite. So Subhuti might mean born of emptiness, which would make sense. And it also might mean auspicious sign. And the legend of Subhuti is that when he was born, and this is a kind of an odd little story, Chinese Buddhism is full of the most wonderful stories, you know. Many, I know I've often read the commentaries of Master Hua, who was a great Chinese teacher who lived in California and died maybe 25 years ago or so. And he would talk on sutras, and he was full of legends and stories, you know, the most charming and amazing sort. So this is, and I think that, you know, there are legends, and also in Indian Buddhism as well, but I think the Chinese legends are particularly wonderful and outlandish. And this is one of those. Subhuti, when he was born, all of a sudden all the silverware in the house disappeared. Gone, you know, like the next day they went to have breakfast, you know, no silverware. So, he was born of emptiness. But 7 days later, the silverware miraculously reappeared, which was an auspicious sign. So this is just like emptiness. There's actually nothing there at all, and yet everything appears to be there just as it always was. So at first, things seem to be there, then they seem to disappear, and then they seem to reappear. If we use the word emptiness, it emphasizes the time when things disappear. You could also call it, and some translators like to call it boundlessness instead of emptiness, boundlessness, which indicates that the things reappear after having disappeared. And when they reappear, now you understand that they actually don't have the boundaries that they appeared to have. They're actually limitless, even though they appear, as they did in the beginning, to have boundaries. And this goes not only for things like silverware, but also it goes for our own thoughts and feelings, especially, I suppose, our own thoughts and feelings and perceptions and our own sense of self is without boundary. At first it appears to have boundary, and then maybe it disappears, and then it reappears, and we realize when it reappears that it really doesn't have any limit. So we can be in the tiny fishbowl of the body, or the personality, or the habitual thoughts, or we can be in the fishbowl of the restrictive session schedule, or even in the fishbowl of one period of zazen. It's hard to imagine anything much more restrictive, actually, when you think about it, than zazen. I think if in Guantanamo Bay prison they made the prisoners sit in zazen, they might consider it a form of torture. What? You make them sit there like this without moving? You know, they might say, this is illegal according to the Geneva Conventions. Because it's a pretty restrictive thing. Yeah. And yet, inside these different fish bowls, we can find that, in fact, although externally they seem to be quite limited, internally, in fact, they are without boundaries, beyond all limits. So, this is not exactly a concept, although definitely what I'm telling you now, the words I'm using, this is conceptual. And it's not exactly an experience, because any experience, by virtue of it being an experience that you could point to as an experience and you could define, would be limited. So I guess we'd have to say it's sort of a feeling, sort of a flavor. Maybe we could say it's a sixth or seventh sense that we develop about our living. A sort of lightness of being, or a sense of well-being that, as I was saying yesterday, can be there even if things are not going well. So that they would always be recognized as going well, even if they appear to be not going well. That they would always be going well, always be going exactly as they should, even though objectively one might say, oh, this is a desperate situation. So this is subhuti, this is born of emptiness, auspicious sign. Subhuti, who activates the sutra. So then we come to the next part in chapter 3. So Subhuti, as we have already seen, has pressed his palms together and bowed to the Buddha and says to him, "It is rare, Bhagavan, most rare indeed, Sugata. how the Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one, blesses fearless bodhisattvas with the best of blessings. And it is rare, Bhagavan, how the Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one, entrusts fearless bodhisattvas with the greatest of trusts. So that's how he begins his statement to the Buddha. And these are all other names of the Buddha. Bhagavan, Sugata, which means something like going in peace or pleasure, going in happiness. Tathagata, going in thusness, in pure, empty presence. Arhan, the worthy one, truly worthy, the fully enlightened one. So he's addressing him with all these different names. In other words, in the most formal, most respectful way, using all these different titles and so on. So it is rare, indeed, how you bless the fearless bodhisattvas with the best of blessings, and how you entrust the fearless bodhisattvas with the greatest of trusts. So, I find this passage, really wonderful to contemplate, really beautiful. And, you could gloss over this to get to the real stuff, But isn't it great, that the Buddha, even before any teaching in the sutra begins, the Buddha has already blessed the bodhisattvas with the greatest of blessings, entrusted the bodhisattvas with the greatest trust. So there's already, before anything happens, blessing and entrustment bestowed upon us by the Buddhas. Such a rare and wonderful thing that we're already blessed and trusted. And we don't have to earn this or prove it to anybody or to ourselves. It's already there before anything else happens. Or maybe if you think that we do have to earn it, then, okay, we already earned it from many past lifetimes practice. And now here in this lifetime, we've already been blessed and been entrusted. So that's a fantastic thing, and it's important to recognize that everything that flows from this sutra comes out of this pre-existing blessing and pre-existing entrustment. And it's very important, the sense of gratitude that if you're alive, you're already blessed, and if you're alive in the very fact of living, of being alive, there's a kind of trust that arises from that. And I think that to a great extent one could say that we return to the cushion over and over again just to get used to that, just to notice that. So when you come to the cushion, and it's enough to feel that you're alive on the cushion, just to feel, I often say this, just breathe and be aware and feel the feeling of being alive. That in feeling the feeling of being alive, what you're feeling is your blessedness and the trust that is within you by virtue of your being in life. And it's based on that the teaching arises. So that's what Subhuti says next. He says, so we are, it's wonderful. And I'm grateful that we are blessed and we are entrusted. But even so, he says, even so, Bhagavan, if a noble son or daughter should set forth on the bodhisattva path, how should they stand? How should they walk? And how should they control their thoughts? So even though we're already blessed and entrusted, we need to express it. Or maybe another way of putting it would be, because we're blessed and entrusted, because we're blessed and entrusted, it feels incumbent upon us to find a way to live that and express that. So how do we do that? That's really Subhuti's question. So I appreciate, how it really is with us. I don't feel a lack or some trouble. I appreciate that life is blessed and is full of trustingness. But we have to live it. So how do we do that? How do we express this blessing, express this entrustment? And the way Subhuti expresses this question is, how should we stand? How should we walk? How should we control our thoughts? So we could take Subhuti's words here pretty literally. How do we practice mindfulness? How do we practice mindfulness of standing, mindfulness of walking, mindfulness of our thoughts and emotions? Since, as we learned last night, the Buddha is sitting there, Subhuti is facing the Buddha, and the Buddha is sitting there literally practicing mindfulness of the arising object in front of him, in this case Subhuti's words. So the Buddha is looking at the Buddha and seeing the Buddha is practicing mindfulness of Subhuti's words. So Subhuti says, well, how could we also practice mindfulness as you are even now doing, Buddha? Practice mindfulness of standing, mindfulness of walking, mindfulness of being with what's inside of us. So you could understand his words in that way. Or you could understand them more broadly. How should we abide within our lives? How should we stand within our lives? How should we make effort to go forward in walking the path? What kind of attitude or spirit should we be cultivating? Anyway, however you interpret Subhuti's words, whether quite narrowly and literally or more broadly, it comes to the same thing. How do we practice, given who we really are? How do we practice? How do we proceed? How do we recognize and express our ultimate blessedness, our ultimate entrustment, and how can we live our lives based on this? So now, Buddha next answers. Buddha told the Venerable Subhuti, "Well said, Subhuti. Well said. So it is, Subhuti. It is as you say. The Tathagata blesses fearless bodhisattvas with the best of blessings and entrusts fearless bodhisattvas with the greatest of trusts. You should therefore truly listen, Subhuti, and consider this well. I shall tell you how those who set forth on the bodhisattva path should stand, how they should walk, and how they should control their thoughts." So that's the beginning, the sort of preamble to Buddha's answer. So he begins by acknowledging what Subhuti has said. Yes, it's true. You are blessed and entrusted just as you say. And I appreciate your question, and I'm about to answer you. But before I do, let me ask a favor of you. Please truly listen. So would you please truly listen before I speak? And would you please truly consider what I'm about to tell you? And the Venerable Subhuti answered this request by saying, "May it be so, Bhagavan." And he gave his full attention. So usually in a sutra like this, one doesn't much notice the initial question, or one doesn't much notice the attitude that must be cultivated by those who would receive the answer. Because we're all interested, give me the meat, Where's the beef? What's the answer? What's the teaching? So glossing over the rest, get to the point right away. So it's the teaching that we're concerned. The answer, the question seems unimportant, the attitude seems unimportant. But actually, remember, this is an emptiness sutra, so the answer is empty. Which is to say, there's no such thing as the answer, the teaching, separate from all the rest of this. The answer is without boundary. So there's no teaching, there's no answer per se. There's question and response as one phenomenon without any boundary. And it's not just question and response, it's also the quality of listening, the quality of attention, the quality of deep and respectful consideration. I mean, when you think about it, at this moment, even as I'm talking to you, for sure, the entire Buddhist canon in many languages is on the World Wide Web, floating around in cyberspace, probably in the air right here, while we're talking, really. Otherwise, how come you put a little antenna and boom, there it is? It's because it's there already. It doesn't get created by this antenna, right? It's there, floating around in the air. So no problem about the teaching. But without a heartfelt question, without real listening, without real attentiveness and consideration, these things floating around in the air are not actually teachings. They're just little things floating around in the air that appear on our computer screens as words with spaces and punctuation, little light blips on a screen. They don't really become teaching until there's a question that brings them to life, the passionate need to know and understand, the human desire to activate spirituality within our lives. And then from that desire and need, listening, consideration. This is why we spent a lot of time the last few days practicing listening to one another, practicing learning how to listen, because we have to learn how to listen if we want to really receive teachings. It's why we take the time to study and consider the teachings as we have been. And part of that listening and that consideration is also our expression. It's part of it. So we've been expressing our understanding and our questions and our thoughts and feelings. So it's literally the case that the teaching is not what's spoken or what's written down by the teacher. It's this whole complex of activity. The question, the response, the listening, the attention, the consideration. Not only in our minds, but with our whole bodies. And not only here, but everywhere in our lives. So it's a very beautiful and humble response when asked to listen and consider. Subhuti says, "May it be so. May it be so." In other words, I will do my best to be worthy of your teaching, to practice listening, attentiveness, consideration. And I want to be worthy of the blessings you've already given and the trust that you've bestowed. And I hope, I pray, that I really will be able to listen and pay attention. May it be so. It's a little prayer that Subhuti makes. May it be so. May I really be able to listen. So then the Buddha begins to give his answer. Chapter 3. The Buddha said to him, Subhuti, those who would now set forth on the bodhisattva path should thus give birth to this thought. And here's the thought. However many beings there are, in whatever realm of beings might exist, whether they are born from an egg, or born from a womb, born from the water, or born from the air, whether they have form or no form, whether they have perception or no perception, or neither perception nor no perception, in whatever conceivable realm of being one might conceive of beings, in the realm of complete nirvana, I shall liberate them all. And though I thus liberate countless beings, not a single being is liberated. And why not? Subhuti, a bodhisattva who creates the perception of a being, cannot be called a bodhisattva. And why not? Subhuti, no one can be called a bodhisattva who creates the perception of a self, or who creates the perception of a being, a life, or a soul. So this may not be the answer we were looking for. Subhuti asks, how do we practice? And the Buddha affirms, that's a good question, and I appreciate it, and I'm going to answer the question. So we were expecting maybe some helpful suggestions, like pay attention to the breath, stand this way, don't stand that way, work with your thoughts this way and not that way. Maybe we were saying, maybe develop generosity, here's a technique for developing generosity, or develop equanimity, here's a way that you can develop equanimity, that would be okay. But instead we get this suggestion, give birth to a thought. So how do you give birth to a thought, how do you do that? It's a strange idea, In other words, a thought should spontaneously occur to you like this. That doesn't make sense. How could that be? And what thought? What thought should we spontaneously have? Whatever beings there are, the sorts of beings we know about, and also other kinds of beings that maybe we don't know about, who don't even exist in the material realms, maybe sort of spiritual beings or non-existent, semi-existent beings in some other realms. Whatever kind of beings that there are, in the conventional sense or non-conventional sense, we should think about all these beings. I shall liberate them all. Have that thought spontaneously arise in your mind, and that's the way to practice and to express your blessedness and your entrustment. So, this is an impressive answer, and it really makes you think that true practice, at least the practice that the Buddha is unfolding here in the DiamondSutra, begins with a supremely altruistic thought. A thought that arises out of nowhere, a passionate thought to want to benefit beings, all kinds of beings. In other words, a thought that suddenly dawns on you that you love all of life, all living things, the ones you know about and even the ones you don't know about. And you want to serve them. You want to help them in some ultimate way. And I think that's what it means to say to liberate beings. We use this word. What do we mean by I want to liberate beings? I think it means that we want to provide beings with an ultimate welfare. Real freedom is actually pretty hard to define and to understand. We use the word, but I don't think we really know what we mean by it, actually. But I think it implies a benefit beyond the well-being of the body or the material well-being. If you love all living things, and you love all creatures and all beings, certainly you want them to not be harmed. And insofar as they're deprived of something in the material realm, you certainly want to provide them with that from which they're separated. Also, you care about them emotionally. You don't that much worry about the emotional life, say, of a bug or a bird. But when it comes to human beings, you're also concerned not only with their material well-being, but also with their emotional well-being. In other words, you want them to be happy and not miserable. As we all know, people could have plenty of stuff, but be awfully miserable. So you wish them happiness. But at the same time, of course, one recognizes that all beings, because they are beings, are vulnerable, that something's always going to break. And in the end, life will be over. And this liberation that you wish for beings goes beyond that. Even though we don't exactly know what it is, it's a freedom and a sense of welfare that's wider and deeper than any freedom that could be achieved in this limited lifetime. Although, as I say, it includes the happiness of this lifetime. So it's a tremendous sense of hope and desire to benefit others that goes beyond anything that we could imagine. So I don't think that we exactly know what we're talking about when we say we want to liberate beings, but it doesn't matter that we know, because there's a feeling that this thought arises that I want to liberate, I want to benefit beings in this ultimate way, whatever that turns out to look like. I'm not even sure. That's, I think, what we mean by liberation. So that's the Buddha says, that's how you should walk. That's how you should stand. That's how you should control your thoughts, by all of a sudden being surprised by a thought of love for all beings, a love that's not only an emotion, but something that's grounded and active. And I think the implication here is that it's a transformative thought, not just a thought you have once and then that's it, but a thought that once you have it, you can't ever live the way you were living before. You must live differently. So there's much more to say about this, especially about the part about how even though you liberate all these beings, there are no beings liberated. We haven't talked about that yet, but that's for tomorrow. So, thank you for listening and considering. May our intention